In the last video, we deployed our first HTML page and we learned a little bit about the structure of HTML. In this video, we're going to focus on the structural elements within HTML that allow us to do some cool things when compared to the traditional word processing document. So in our word processing document, so let's go back to my mouse really quick. In our word processing document, we see we got a header, we've got a paragraph of text, and we've got a list. Now, these things are all separated by spaces. It creates separation and distance from each type of element on the page or in the document. But most of the time, Word documents are simply words and paragraphs and lists separated by spaces. Whereas inside of an HTML document, we actually have the ability to do much more dynamic layouts, kind of like a PDF, right? So you've got Word documents where it's mostly just text with some layout features and the ability to distinguish between, important elements and type of text. Whereas a PDF document, you can have a ton of cool things. It lets you do more formatting. So if we want to think about a HTML document that's displayed in a web page, it is more like a PDF than it is a Word document. So we're kind of progressing from the basic Word document with basic text, which is kind of what our home page is right now, into more of a dynamic, pretty layout that can be created with HTML using CSS. And we'll get into the layout and making things pretty when we get to CSS. Right now, we're going to focus on the structure of the document that allows us to do this. So let's talk through this really quick. On this page, we have basic text elements, such as the H1s, H2s, and H3s, which end up being this bigger text that we see. So this is most likely an H1, that's probably an H1, that's probably an H1, that's probably an H2. This is probably an H3, and maybe this is an H4. So when I say H1, 2, 3, 4, we're talking about headers. And those headers can have different sizes and look and feel in order to increase and reduce the importance they have in the visual hierarchy on the page. So that's why we have headers, and then we have basic paragraph text. So on this page, this would probably be paragraph text right here. This would be paragraph text, and this would be paragraph text. So that gives us the very basic textual elements, which brings us back to a regular Word document. But if we want to have structure to the page and make it more visual, more graphical, then what we do is we add structural elements. So let's talk about structural elements. On this page, we have quite a few structural elements. If you look at this one right here, you'll see that we've got a rounded corner box that sits right up here, and it's halfway between this box, which separates, it looks like, the header of the page or the navigation of the page, and then the main content of the page, which is this gray box right here, which goes all the way down and across. Now, this one actually breaks the two and comes halfway into this main header area and then comes down into this kind of body area. Now, this right here is a structural element, and we have several different ways we can create structural elements inside of HTML that allow us to create these visual structural elements like this box right here and this box right here. And then we see that there's actually another box right here. This box goes across the entire page almost, and then we've got two smaller boxes down here, and then we've got our nice little one right here that kind of breaks past this divide in the page. Now we're going to go ahead now and we're going to add those structural elements. Now the funny thing is that in order to make it look like this, we're going to have to use CSS, but we're not diving into CSS right now. What I want you to understand is that we are building the structure of the web page right now, and later on we're going to make it pretty and put these boxes where we want using CSS. So let's kind of build a structure similar to this one in our current HTML page and see how that works and what elements we use to do that. So let's go to our Visual Studio Code, or Visual Studio Code. And here's our HTML document that we see in our browser right here. This is web development. And right now, the structure of what we visually see is simply just an H1. Now, on this page right here, we actually have several different sections that we're going to want to build. So let's start off with this section right here, this big one that is dark blue or almost black. And let's say that that is our header section. Not to be confused with a header for text, but a header section. And what we can do for that is we can actually use what is called a section tag. And inside this section tag, we are going to put everything that lives in this big section right here. And so we have up here kind of a breadcrumb kind of thing right here. We have our account login, we have a notifications button, and then we have our primary navigation right here. So let's kind of play with that really quick. Let's build our big sections first so that we understand the overall structure of the document. Then we can get into the smaller stuff. So we just created this big header section right here. And then we have this body-like section down here, not to be confused with our HTML body, which defines the entire visual document. I'm just talking about the body of what we see right here, the body of this document. So let's add a section for that. So let's go ahead and let's get rid of our H1 for right now. And let's add another section. And let's put our H1 inside of that section. And so we've got this big header, we've got this body section, and now we've got these other boxes right here. So this box seems to be first in the visual hierarchy as we go from top to bottom. So for this, since it's not really a full-blown section of the page, but more of a little container in the page, we're going to use a different structural element, and we're going to use a div for that. So let me reset that really quick. We're going to use a div. So a div is just a division in the page, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with a section of the page that has specific meaning. It's more of just a division in the page that has its own content in it. So since this lives halfway between the header and halfway between this body section, but it really is body content, I'm going to add it to our body section. So let's go ahead and put the div in here. Now, one thing we can start doing right now with our HTML structure is we can start giving each of these things names. Or let's start out with titles. So this section, we're going to give it a title. And let's go ahead and call this one main header. All right, so main header. And then let's go ahead and call this one main body. So these titles are just an attribute of our HTML tag. And HTML tags actually have a ton of different attributes that we can use, which you will learn about as you begin building more and more web pages. Right now, I'm introducing you to the title just so that we can name these sections so we know what they are and how they relate to this page. So this section is the main header, that's the dark one. The main body is the light one. And then in here, we've got kind of a division in content. So this is what this div is. So let's give it a title really quick. And let's call it website, because this has to do with our repository and our website. So let's just go ahead and call this website info, because it provides us kind of the main information about the website. It gives us the name of the website, it gives us the URL, tells us it comes from GitHub, and then it gives us the option to go to domain settings if we wanted to add a custom domain, and then site settings if we want to get into the details of the site settings. So I think that's a good name for it. We'll call it website info. And then down here we have a getting started division, and it's inside of our overall main body, so we definitely want that one to be in there. So let's div title, and it is called getting started. So let's just call it getting started. And that gives us this section right here in the web page. Now we got two others. If we're going top to bottom and we're going left to right, this production deploys section right here is going to be first in our document structure, because from top to bottom, left to right, it comes before our deploy views. So let's add another one. Let's do div title. I'm going to call this production deploys. Now, a lot of times you're not going to use title a lot, but for this understanding or this purpose, we're going to use it just so we can tag everything so we know what it is, so that when we do get to styles, we can start using styles to do it. And then we got deploy views. So div title, let's call it deploy previews. Oops, we want to use a dash. Okay, so we're going to stop right there. There's a lot more structure to this, but I think you get the idea. We use a section tag to define main sections within the page, within the HTML page. And then we use divs for kind of these divisions of content within the page. And we can actually use sections as well. We could have used sections for these divs, but based on this, it kind of looks more like these are division of content that sits within the main body. So in this video, we've seen the structural part of a web page. So let's deploy this really quick, and let's see what it looks like in our web page when we don't have any CSS to move things into a special position in our page. So let's add some content to these particular divisions in our page. So I'm going to move that H1 into my website info, and let's go ahead and change it to my website so we can see where that's at. And then this one was a getting started. So getting started, since my website is important, let's do the getting started as an H2, which introduces us to another header tag that's smaller. And we'll do getting started. And then this one is production deploys. It's about as important as getting started, so let's use an H2. And then down here, deploy previews, same thing. They're all about the same importance in the visual hierarchy of the document. And we'll say, oh, we're doing deploy previews. Deploy previews. All right. Now, when we deploy this HTML page to our website, we're going to be able to see how the page looks when we don't have CSS to really make it visually impactful like we see on this page. We get to see what just the basic structure of a web page, how it gets rendered by the browser when no styling information is provided by a CSS style sheet. If you don't understand what a CSS style sheet is, don't worry, we will get into those coming up. All right, so let's go ahead and deploy this. As always, we need to make sure that we are inside of the repository for this website, and then we are going to do git add. Let's see, git status should show us that our HTML page was modified and it is now set to be part of a change set. So we can do git commit -m to add a message to it. And let's say added structural elements to index. And then if we look at our status again, it's all on our local repository. So we need to get it up to GitHub so it can be deployed. So we'll do a git push. And once it's deployed, we can go back, reload our GitHub, and we should see Added structural elements to our index, so we see that those got pushed. And then if we come back and we reload, we should see that it is queued. It is queued to be pushed to our web server. So we need to wait till it says published before we're going to see it on the actual website. Give it a minute or two, we'll reload it. Okay, now that it's published to the website, to the web server, we should be able to refresh and see the structure of our web page. Now, interesting enough, in here we used an H1 and we used an H2 in order to differentiate between these different headers. But as we can see, the headers right here, H1 and H2, look identical. Unlike in a Word document where if I do this and then I have another one, so getting started, getting started, and if I do an H2, we'll see there's a difference, right? This one's a little bit bigger, darker text, maybe a little more bold. This one's smaller, a little bit of a different color, but you can see there's a difference between the H1 and H2. Now, despite that fact, we do have the structure of the website right here defined, and the structure of the website is being done in the web page. It's just we don't have any CSS or cascading style sheets that tell the browser how to make this look pretty. In other words, we don't have the instructions written yet that tell it to make the My Website section dark and to make the main body section lighter. And then we don't have instructions to tell it to put the website info up here. And we don't have something to tell us to put the getting started, this section right here, down here. That's what CSS does for us. So HTML defines the structure of the document, and CSS allows us to make it look and feel pretty. So make sure you realize the difference between those two things, that CSS makes it look pretty. So right now, we've got it deployed, we've got our structure. If we go ahead and we open up, our JavaScript console and we look at the elements, we can see that we have the structure here that we defined, and it's all the way we set it up. It's just not pretty yet. So we'll have to wait till we get to CSS to make it pretty. In the next couple of videos, we're going to be going over more of the standard HTML elements and how to use them before we get into CSS.